The Eye in Inclusion, presented by Eloise Cleary and Samuel Yu, AliCamp 2021. We'd like to thank our gold sponsors Telstra and Intopia, our silver sponsors ANZ and Coles, and our bronze sponsor How2.
Hi everyone, and welcome to today's AliCamp session, where Sam and I will be presenting the Eye in Inclusion. Today we'll be discussing the importance of including diverse perspectives and experiences in inclusion and accessibility practice. This encompasses recognising what we as practitioners bring to the table. In today's presentation, we'll invite you to reflect upon your own identity and your role as an inclusion or accessibility practitioner. So today I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land. For me, that's the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. And Sam?
I'm on Darawal land today.
We'd like to recognise their continuing connection to land. I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and also recognise any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders that might be viewing this presentation today. So a little bit about us, the people speaking here today. Sam and I are both inclusive designers at the Centre for Inclusive Design. We're really excited to use this opportunity to share some of our learning experiences. We're both quite early on in our design career, so we've had quite steep learning curves. I know that for both of us, we've had little to no prior training on inclusive design. So jumping into this, we've had a lot of learning experiences we'd like to share today. And a lot of that has actually made us reflect upon our own practices and how we deliver and design work and how we interact with people. And at Centre for Inclusive Design, we really emphasise the importance of diversity. As such, reflecting upon our own identities and roles as inclusive designers and what we impart on people is really important and integral to the work we do. So the way that we've framed today is in 3 sections. So this is pre-engagement, during engagement and post-engagement. And we've looked at this as how you may be interacting with people, how you might be assessing a project. This may be usability testing. It could be assessing the accessibility of a website. So in pre-engagement, we're getting you to look at what is the significance of understanding your role and yourself, and what might you bring to the table. During engagement, how does this impact the way that you work? And how does that influence the way that you interact with others as a result? How do you engage with them? And post-engagement, how does this influence the future of your practice? And what does your inclusive practice look like in the future as a result?
So at the Centre for Inclusive Design, we like to promote the 3 dimensions of inclusive design as a way to introduce everyone to our practice. These dimensions are drawn from the Inclusive Design Research Centre in Canada and also from Kat Holmes' work on mismatches. So the 3 are: 1, to recognise diversity and uniqueness, understanding that there is no average person; 2, to use inclusive processes and tools, evoking the mantra, nothing about us without us; and 3, to see the potential for broader beneficial impact of designing inclusively. Today, we're primarily going to be focused on the first 2, as we reflect upon the diversity of ourselves as inclusion and accessibility practitioners, and also to understand what it is that we bring into our practice, the different perspectives and biases and experiences that we have. And in recognizing this, how we can better include more community in our practice. So for this talk, as Eloise mentioned, we have divided into 3 sections. First, we're going to start with pre-engagement, which is to look internally on ourselves as practitioners and also on the teams that we work with. And as such, how we can better engage other communities in our work, for example, people with disability. So in this first section, we'll be talking about looking at you as a practitioner, recognizing that you bring your perspectives, values, knowledge, and biases into your work. Being able to critically reflect upon yourself is the first step to meaningful engagement in participatory practice, such as co-design sessions that we do a lot of at CFID. In our work, we stress the diversity of teams, participants, and working groups as key, and we do our best to include the right mix of people. One of the most critical things is recognizing ourselves as one of those people, because we can be so easily focused on the diversity of others that we try to include that we neglect to reflect upon our own individual perspectives that we bring in. Often in our work, we're leading or facilitating workshops and other practices, and in this, we're bringing in our perspectives, knowledge, values, and biases. This directly shapes the work that we do and the impact that we then have on others. And equally, others are shaping us as we are engaged with them. As such, we must be aware of our own positionality. And in reflecting upon this and making it explicit, This helps us to identify our strengths and our weaknesses, what areas we might be strong in diversity in, and what areas that we might be a bit lacking. And so some questions to ask yourself now are, what am I bringing into my practice? What is my role as a practitioner? And am I willing to share power and control of this practice? And more importantly, how will I actually do this? So to start our reflection today, we'd like you all to try this activity with us. If you could please get out something to write with, a pen and paper, or just open up a new note on your phone or your computer. Some of you may have already done this activity before, potentially in a different format. It's often phrased as who are the people that you trust the most or the people you spend the most time around. As we're at AliCamp today, we'd like you to write down the top 5 people or sources that you turn to when thinking about or discussing accessibility and inclusion. So this could be colleagues, industry leaders, or blogs or books that you like to read. You don't have to have a direct relationship with these people or things. The order of the list doesn't particularly matter, but we try to recommend putting down at least 3 people or sources for this activity to work best. And so we'll give you a bit of time to jot those down, and we'll play some thinking music now. So hopefully now you have your list of 3 to 5 people. We'd like you now to try and fill in these characteristics of who or what that you've written down. So these characteristics are their gender, age, ethnicity, level of education, sexual orientation, disability, and socioeconomic status. Now, you don't have to know the fully correct answer, just try and provide your best estimate. We are also recognizing that for the sake of this activity, we're making some generalizations and assumptions. If you really have no idea, you can leave it out, but try your best to make an educated guess. The more information that you can put down, the more things that we'll have to reflect upon. If you did put a book or a blog in, you can fill in some of the details of age, such as being how long ago it was published, or you can fill in other aspects with what you know of the authors or the editors or the people who run the blog. We'll give you about 5 minutes to do this now. So hopefully now you've filled out all those details and you should have a pretty good sense of the diversity of the people or sources that you turn to when it comes to accessibility and inclusion. We'd like you to have a look through this list now and reflect upon it. How diverse is this list? Are there any commonalities and what are the differences? Are there particular patterns that stand out to you? So when Eloise and I did this earlier, we like to share some reflections of our own. One thing that stood out to me was that everybody that I turn to is university educated. Most of them are people that we work with, and also that it's quite hard to judge socioeconomic status. That's the one that we really struggled with.
Definitely. I also noticed across my own list that both gender and sexual orientation was quite homogenous groups, very similar lived experiences. And I think having some more diversity in that mix could really enrich my own understanding. I think that's something that I really need to work on and, gather more insights from people of different backgrounds in that respect.
So having reflected upon that, there is a popular quote out there that we're the average of the 5 people that we spend the most time with. Now, this claim has largely been disproven by social studies, but the idea behind it is still valid. For the sake of the activity, we did 5, but we're really a part of a much more complex system of people and things and influences. So we are shaped by the things and people that we surround ourselves with, and the people that we associate with, the people that we work with, the communities and spaces of which we're a part of. And this goes beyond just personal interactions or direct relationships. We're also shaped by things as well, such as the resources from which we learn, and behind that, the people who are creating and delivering those. So this week, we're all being shaped by the community at Alley Camp. Everybody listening to this talk right now is being shaped by the things that Eloise and I are saying. And that all comes from the background from which we were raised and that we work in, and the uniqueness and diversity behind that. So beyond the external influences which shape and influence us, recognizing that we are made up of a very large variety of different experiences and personal qualities, it's important to reflect upon the individualness of ourselves. Recognizing this background and the position allows us to better understand who we are and what we're bringing to our work and also our engagements with others. So our work is never objective or neutral. It's always shaped and framed by who we are and the lenses in which we view the world and that we understand it through. So activities such as this, called the positionality wheel, here adapted from the critical designer and scholar Leslie Ann Noel, helps us to articulate and make explicit the many different dimensions and factors that shape us as people and also what we bring to our practice. Now, this is by no means a comprehensive account for who somebody is, but these are some of the key characteristics to reflect upon. We'd love to hear what other factors that you think might be important to reflect upon when it comes to accessibility and inclusion work. But right now, we'd like to invite you to pause this video, take a screenshot of the template here and have a go in your own time. We'd encourage you to spend some time to reflect individually, but also to share this activity with those that you work with in order to promote a team discussion on diversity. Hopefully this will reveal some of the commonalities and some of the strengths and also some of the areas that might be a bit lacking.
And so this activity is sort of a central circle where it says, who am I? And this is where you write your own personal name, and then has surrounding circles around it with different components of who make you who you are. So to go around to some of the circles, we have race and ethnicity, age, gender and sexuality, disability, marital status, parental status, where you grew up, class and status growing up, class and status today in the current time, your education level, your job level, any languages you speak. So those are some of the considerations presented in this activity.
So the next thing we'd like to discuss is cognitive bias. We're all human, and despite our best efforts, we aren't always as rational and attentive as we'd like to think. Cognitive biases are implicit habits and ways of thinking which frame our worldviews and our behaviors. So these biases drive many of our actions quite instinctively and can often quite unwittingly lead to exclusion if we aren't aware of them. There are very many recorded biases out there from studies and science. We've presented this diagram here just to outline a few of them, such as the anchoring effect, blind spots, gambler's fallacy, I won't get into all of this as we'd be here all day, but I'd encourage everyone to have a little look at the work out there that's been done. It is a bit of a rabbit hole, but it's a very fascinating and frankly quite an important one. We do recognize that not everybody is affected by these biases in the same ways, but so it's important that we try to reflect upon the ones that we might be most prone to when it comes to inclusion and accessibility work, and also think through the ways of which we might be able to mitigate and design some of these biases out. So we thought at this point in time, we'd like to share two particular ones that we've reflected upon that have stood out to us individually. So I'll start by speaking about the illusory superiority bias. So this bias comes in many shapes and forms and happens in different ways in many different contexts. You might be familiar with this by a different name, such as superiority bias or the Dunning-Kruger effect. So this bias refers to a false sense of superiority where you overestimate your knowledge or ability in comparison to others. So studies have shown that the less knowledgeable or skilled we are in something, the less likely we're actually going to be able to recognize our lack of knowledge and skills in those areas. This also goes the other way, in that the more knowledgeable and skilled we are, the more likely we're to underestimate ourselves. But the reason I'm focusing on this particular bias today is to highlight that we risk overestimating ourselves and undermining the knowledge and skills and experiences of others, particularly those who have been historically marginalized, ignored, and excluded. The risk for this gets higher when we might be thought of by others as the experts. So designers in the past, and in many cases still, are thought of as experts in problem solving and creativity. We get hired in as consultants who can come in, do research, empathize with users, and come up with these amazing and innovative solutions. Now, this narrative of the expert designer, which thankfully is on its way out, perpetuates the false idea that designers are uniquely capable of gathering and creating knowledge and being creative and innovative. More and more, we're starting to recognize the importance of co-designing and community-led practices where designers actually take a step back and allow the people who are affected and have lived experience to lead the design work. Instead, we move into a role where we facilitate or we support the knowledge and creativity of others. So the expert designer way of working, which at the time of our design training in university was the dominant narrative, a time where design thinking was very heavily promoted. But now inclusive design and accessibility were not things that were taught, barely mentioned if brought up at all, really, sadly. Which in other words meant that I myself and many others were actually trained to exclude through ignorance and a risk of a false sense of superiority when it comes to designing.
Thanks, Sam. I think similarly, as I started to explore the list of all the cognitive biases, I found that I had been experiencing similarity bias. And this is something that through my work in inclusive design, I've been learning how to design out this bias. So the similarity bias is also known as people like me bias. It's the natural tendency for people to connect with others who share similar interests, experience, and backgrounds. So we tend to agree with people whom we share opinions outside of the given topic. For example, if you enjoy talking about, certain music, then maybe if I met, Sam in the break room at work, the similarity principle says that you're more likely to subconsciously support their ideas and in a meeting rather than, say, Scott, whom you might share nothing in common with. So previously, before coming into my role in ID, especially during uni, I was around those that were really similar to me. So if I had done that diversity footprint exercise we'd previously done, I would have found that they would have been pretty homogenous group, really similar backgrounds, ages, education, as you said. It really wasn't until I started to get an inclusive space in my honours year when I started working with people with diverse lived experience, such as amputees, to really understand how their rich knowledge from difference and those systemic barriers really change how a design is made. So this really impacted me as a designer because I realized that when I had been designing prior to this, I'd really been designing for myself or those similar to me. And this can really restrict who can interact with your products or your systems or whatever interaction you're designing. So now I'm sure that now I try and ensure that I'm always engaging with people across a full range of diversity and really trying to design out of this similarity bias where I'm looking at engaging with others for their differences.
In recognizing that there are so many biases out there, we invite you to take a look at yourself and to spend some time right now just to have a skim through the list. So we've got this list here. It is a Wikipedia list because we figured that was probably the most accessible format out there. There's a lot of websites that we've realized aren't as accessible, unfortunately. So there is the link on the screen there, or you can just Google list of cognitive biases, and Wikipedia should be one of the first ones that pop up. We'd like you to just spend a little bit of time having a look through this list and try and identify any biases that you might recognize in yourself or that you actually might have experienced from others. We'll give you a bit of time to think through this, and we'd love for you to think about how this bias may have affected your work and how it may have affected exclusion of other people.
So now that we've looked inward and reflected on our role as practitioners, we're going to look at how this impacts the way we work and engage with others. So we'll be asking you to reflect on how and who you have included in your practice and how you've constructed your interactions and your projects. So we're just going to start with another little activity. We want to use this activity to think about how you form relationships and how you connect with others. So we'll just give another few minutes for this activity, only 1 or 2. So people I work best with. So we want you to do 2 things. We want you to write down 5 qualities of someone you really like working with. And we want you to write down 5 qualities of someone you struggle to work with. So we'll just give you a minute or so for that. So now that we've done this activity, later after this session, I'd like you to review your list. I'd like you to look at the people who you really like working with and those who you struggle to work with. I think something that might be interesting to look out for is this concept of similarity bias. Are those that you like working with similar to you? I know, someone might be extroverted and you like interacting with them. However, when you're doing that, you might be not getting those perspectives of those who are a bit more reflective or introverted, and they might bring something really different to the conversation or to the table of your design process or any of your practice. So this is why we really need to look at having the most diversity in our work as possible. So participation is nothing without meaningful consideration on who is participating. So while recruiting, bringing in anyone to be within your design, it's important to identify key stakeholders being a really diverse group and cohorts with a range of lived experiences in order to really enrich your research or your practice findings. So what's really interesting is to look at your diversity footprint. Look at that exercise again. Look at where your gaps are. Look at where you might need to have some more diversity or some different voices, and really critically review what is there and look at whose voice you're missing and who you might need to include. And so at this stage, we want you to ask yourself a few questions. What do you know about the included communities? What is your relationship with these communities? What's their role in the engagement and what's their stake in the outcome? Because it's not only about how you engage with them, it's their understanding of how they're engaging with you and what their role is in this relationship. And when discussing relationships and creating an inclusive practice, it's really important to think about power, choice, and control. So this is really about being aware of the power dynamics in the room. So power is dictated by how you manage choice and control. Some interesting questions to think about that we do whenever we're going into a session. It could be a focus group or anything with more people. So who has the loudest voice? Who is the person with the pen? Who has the most money? Now, these three people are probably most typical to speak out and share their experiences and their thoughts and opinions. It's really important to consider the dynamics and how you've considered where the choice and control have been considered. An interesting analogy to this might be that of a smartphone. Say we're designing the accessibility and inclusion of a smartphone, and you're putting choice in the hand of the designer when they're picking what accessibility features they have. A smartphone is a really good example because there are so many different ways you can interact with it that suit your abilities, your needs, or your requirements. And the control is around giving them the ability of when they would like to interact and how they would like to do that, whether you're turning the phone off and on or whether or not you're participating. And usually, generally with power, it comes with hierarchy. It comes with who's at the top of the business and who's making the decisions. I think it's really interesting that we look at, as designers, who has the power? Is it yourself as the designer? Are you putting the power, or are you looking at a multi-directional conversation where the power also sits with the person you're designing for? It even, goes all the way back to the person who's given the designer the brief. We could keep going back and see where the real power lies and how this really changes the outcome of the product. What are the intentions and who has a say in what that intention is? So at Centre for Inclusive Design, in order to create an inclusive environment and really open that inclusive dialogue, we usually look at these 5 areas at the beginning to really set the tone, to create alignment for any stakeholders or participants that are really involved in a practice. We really unpack the idea of what respect means. Everyone has a different idea, and how can we align on that? And ensuring that everyone is accountable for their own emotions and everyone's experiences are valid in the room. Because although we may have different experiences and backgrounds, it's really important to reflect that their opinion is just as valid as yours. And usually, as we know, everyone has a reason for why they say the things they do. They might have had some experience that you don't know about. And we really look at that idea of one voice, all ears, in order to really get the most out of everyone's opinions and experiences. So, and not only is it about talking, but it's about listening. And inclusive listening is so important. So, openness to others' perspective, not only what does it mean for you, but what does it mean for them? So really unpacking what they mean and using techniques, thinking of positive intentionality, like supporting and adding to their conversation with the 5 whys, really unpacking the root of their problem and why they're saying the things they have. This is especially useful when you may have a room of key stakeholders with all different experiences and interactions with the product. And it's really important to see how they do this differently and where they're coming from. It's really important to acknowledge others' feelings, values, and perspectives and recognize their position in the room just as a key part within the process that you do as the practitioner. So just as important, relationship is the approach. It's really important to build on trust, transparency, and security, especially critical when we're in this space of inclusion and accessibility, working with people who are traditionally marginalized, or maybe they've experienced trauma. So some key questions to think, what are you doing to ensure people are comfortable participating? How are you building the relationship, and how are you building trust? And that can really be done by those things we just previously mentioned, defining those communal rules, including inclusive listening, and really making sure that your language is positive and inclusive in its nature. So a bit of a framework to use, it's from the Inclusive Playground movement. And it's focused around, can I get there? Can I play there? Can I stay there? And what's interesting is how these different components are all part of the process, but we usually think how inclusive is a product or the outcome. But there's so much more that comes with that. It's the whole service and the system. So can I get there? Barriers and motivators that might influence a person's access to a service, system, or product. Can I play there? These are the factors that influence a person's level of comfort and experience and ability to actually interact with your product or service. And can I stay there? These are the ongoing factors that influence whether a person returns to the service. Do they really love it? And would they recommend it to others as a result? We think this is a really interesting framework that you could use going forward in your practice to reflect upon your work. And not only should you be doing this with yourself, but using this tool with others, going through and seeing how accessible you've made the entire process and that interaction with your design.
So the final part of this is the post-engagement stage. And this is really about constant reflection and constant learning as we're all on a journey of accessibility and inclusion. Something we'd like to do now is just to reflect on one of the recent projects that we had that had an unexpected hiccup. And this is something that's stuck with us since then. So just to set the scene, we were working on a government project that involved research with surrogate parents. The client had arranged for the research sessions to be conducted at their office due to privacy and security reasons and confidentiality surrounding what was going on. This was fine, but we made sure the offices had accessibility features, the most that they had anyway, and that it was in a convenient spot near public transport in order for our participants to easily and comfortably get there. However, what we neglected was that as parents, they might have had to bring their baby along. We are both not parents, Eloise and myself, and in our past experiences working with parents, this actually just never came up. They either got a sitter or there was another parent or partner who was able to look after the child. And so it just didn't cross our minds that it might be a factor. And so unfortunately, on the day of the session, the participant had shown up to the office and sadly had to be turned away by security as the offices didn't have any baby changing facilities and they couldn't accommodate the person with their crying baby. This meant that our participant unfortunately had come all this way only to be told that they couldn't participate. Now, it's not all bad news. We did manage to work something out and were able to do the research at another time, but it just goes to show how our own limited knowledge and experiences resulted in an exclusive experience for someone who we really valued and really wanted their time and knowledge for the project. And this really just highlights how important it is to continuously reflect upon and learn from the experiences of every project. Hopefully this won't happen again for us.
So that was a really big learning curve for Sam and I. It shows how important it is to continually reflect on your process. Inclusion is an ongoing process of reflection and improving on yourself. I know we learned a lot from that scenario. It's really important as you're going throughout the process to continually reflect. I know we had a retrospective and we looked back and thought, how could have we done that differently? How could have we made that more comfortable for the participant? How could have we predicted this happening? So a few questions to ask yourself during the process and after the fact. Can you identify any unconscious bias you brought to the practice? So for Sam and I, we don't usually think in the lens of having a child or being a parent, so we hadn't considered that. What did you learn? There are so many learning outcomes from each study or practice that you do that you continually grow on. Were your assumptions challenged? Had you made some biased assumptions because of the experiences that you've had? And were they challenged, and will this make you think differently in the future? And then as a result, what might you change next time to make your process more inclusive as we continually grow?
So to wrap up with the summary and some parting thoughts, these are the questions that we'd like to leave you with. What am I bringing to my practice? How do others shape my practice? How can I become more aware of bias? And in engaging with others, who is involved and why? And how can I ensure meaningful engagement and participation? And finally, in reflecting and constantly learning, how will you build on your inclusive practice and processes? So we also did a whole range of activities. Obviously, we didn't have a whole lot of time in the 40-minute session. And so we'd invite you to return to this video and return to activities that you've filled out and spend some time reflecting on it all. So just to jog your memory, we did the diversity footprint, looking at the people around us, the positionality wheel, where we reflect upon all the different elements that make up who we are and what we bring into our work. We looked at some biases, and hopefully you can go back to that list there and look at potential ones that impact you and also impact others through your work. And finally, we introduced the inclusion playground framework. How can I get there? Can I play there? And can I stay there?
And I think what's really interesting about once you do sort of identify, this is something that, Sam mentioned, you can go down a bit of a rabbit hole, but once you do start to identify any of those biases that you have, maybe the next stage could be, how might you consciously design out this bias? That next level is, what can I do to make a conscious effort to reduce that impact or avoid what that could do in the future? Thank you, everyone, for joining our presentation today. I hope you were able to reflect on yourself as a practitioner in accessibility and inclusion. Maybe you learned some new things about yourself. Maybe you're reflecting on how you do things and how you engage with others as a result. I think it's really important as a designer, especially in this space of inclusion accessibility, to always consider how you can improve yourself and how you can continually to make change and grow, especially inclusion, because it's something that I'm always learning something new every day.
Thanks, everyone.
See ya.
AliCamp 2021.